This is Eric Rutan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
G'day everybody, welcome to the show. This is a very special milestone edition because it features none other than one of the greatest ever, Thomas G. Warrior from Celtic Frost, Hellhammer and Triptykon. But because you've tuned in, of course you know that, so I'm not going to give any detail about the man's history and his importance to the genre because you already bloody well know all that stuff. I know you do. Now, the catalyst for this chat is due to a tour, Triumph of Death, performing the music of Hellhammer throughout August 2024. Tom will be playing shows across Australia. I'll certainly be at that gig in Brisbane at the Back Room. Incidentally, I'll put all of the dates of the shows in the episode description. Hardly any of you listening actually come from Australia, so I won't go through it all here, but it'll be there in case you're local or if you're planning on traveling. Now, what can I tell you about this chat? In my view, this might well be the most comprehensive deep dive into aspects of the great Celtic Frost that really are glossed over by interviewers. Maybe they feel afraid to ask the question, probably. But Tom was ready to go there, and I can't thank him enough for giving me so much of his time, almost an hour. Wow. If you told me he was going to give me an hour before the chat, I wouldn't have believed you. Why would I? There's hardly any interviews out there with him, let's face it, but this one, here it is, almost an hour of conversation about Cold Lake, so many of the demos that have appeared on YouTube, his relationship with Martin Eric Ain, Reed St. Mark, and much, much more. Need I say anything else? Of course not. Let's dive into it. Here he is, Tom G. Warrior.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
Doing all right. How are you?
Very good. First and foremost, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's I'll just get this out of the way first. My inner young man wouldn't have it any other way, but I've been listening to your music I'm 46, and I don't know what age I was when I got into you, but it was certainly the late 80s or early 90s at this point, and it's been a friend and a companion, and my life wouldn't be the same without it. So there you go.
Thank you very, very much. I don't take this for granted. And you might imagine that somebody coming from Switzerland, it's not something you hear every day from Australia.
Yeah, it just majestic. Yeah, it's just one of those pinch myself moments, I suppose, if you will allow me to indulge for that for a second there, because between you and Steve Harris from Iron Maiden, mate, it's really the two pillars for so many of us as metal fans.
I don't think I belong on that in the same sentence as Steve Harris, to be quite honest, because let's be realistic. But I take the compliment, but I don't think it's applicable to me.
Well, yeah, in my opinion, you're very modest. You're very modest, sir. So I'll give you that.
The thing is, I'm trying to be realistic, and I'm of course I'm a fan too of so many bands that have shaped my life and that have launched me on this path. And I'm simply trying to be realistic in a scene that is not short of egos. And sometimes I've heard some people who don't like me accuse me of fake modesty, and that's totally not the case. Anybody who knows me knows I'm from a very poor working class background, and there's absolutely no reason in my life to be immodest. So my modesty is modest is the wrong word. It's really, I'm trying to be realistic.
I can appreciate that, but for so many of us, it's just it just begins with you and it keeps on going with you. And right now, we're looking forward to the Apocalyptic Raids EP being played, indeed the Satanic Rites demo, all coming down here. So what was it that inspired, if you like, or what was the catalyst behind relaunching some of this material and putting it onto the live stage again?
I'm trying to be as brief as possible in this interview, but it's quite it was a long gestation period. As you probably know, me and some of the other former Hellhammer members had a checkered history with Hellhammer's legacy. Hellhammer wasn't just positive; there was also some very problematic lyrics. Hellhammer existed during an extremely problematic time in our individual lives. It wasn't necessarily a beautiful period in our life. What was beautiful was the camaraderie and meeting every night at that rehearsal room and creating new extreme music. That was the fantastic part of it. But there are a lot of things associated with that time with the band weren't so pleasant. So after Hellhammer, some of us needed some distance from that, me included. I grew closer with Hellhammer's material towards the end of the 1990s and early 2000s when Martin and I began talking about the Celtic Frost reunion. And we took our time with that. We first wanted to define what made us, what has launched us on this path. And this was, of course, also Hellhammer. And we spent many, many nights discussing our history and all the events that happened and why we became musicians. And Hellhammer was a constant token in this. And this was really what first rekindled our interest in Hellhammer again. Maybe 15 years or so after Hellhammer had dissolved. And then when we reunited Celtic Frost, we actually planned on playing some Hellhammer songs in our repertoire. We started practicing some of these in the first half of 2000. The drummer we had at the time couldn't really play these songs the way they should be played, so we eventually abandoned the idea. But we actually spent several rehearsals playing Hellhammer songs, trying to get them into the right shape. So that was basically the first step. And hearing this music live again after such a long time really triggered something in me, which first led to the book about Hellhammer, Only Death is Real. And the book, of course, entailed 5 years of research and interviews with ex-band members and collecting material. And this made me even more keen to finally bring this music on stage, because Hellhammer had never played on stage, and everybody in Hellhammer always perceived that as a missed opportunity. And now I was in the position to finally bring this music to the stage. I didn't know, would it work? Would anybody listen to Hellhammer's music in the 2020s? But at least I wanted to give Hellhammer's music this chance. Here we are.
Yeah, indeed. Here we are. The question, though, is, do you enjoy playing the tunes?
You know what? Maybe 30 years ago I wouldn't have, because of all the issues attached to them. But now, in the final half of my life, and as a 61-year-old adult with a completely different view of life, I love playing this music. What I really love about it is its rawness, its simplicity. It's very punkish, proto-extreme metal, meaning you go on stage and you just plug in the guitar and start playing. When I played with Triptykon or when I played with Celtic Frost, there was always the issue of credibility and artistic creations and good production, and you know, you had to live up to some expectations, very high expectations, which of course is also a challenge that I like as a musician. But Hellhammer is almost like a recreation from this. When I go on stage with Triumph Death and play Hellhammer's music, there isn't too much thought. It's just all about power and connecting with the audience, and it's really like a counterbalance, and I love it. It's fantastic.
There's enough material for a couple of sets, no doubt about that, but I'm sure you can appreciate we all started there or thereabouts, certainly in Australia, with Celtic Frost. So will you be bringing out some Frost classics as well, or will you leave that for Triptykon?
I'll leave that to Triptykon. There are, of course, some songs in Hellhammer's repertoire that survived into the Celtic Frost period. For example, we'll be playing the song Buried and Forgotten, which was a Hellhammer demo that in Celtic Frost we eventually finished and made the Celtic Frost song Necromantical Screams from it. So we're playing the original raw version of it with Triumph Death. And we also played Visions of Mortality, which was the last Hellhammer song ever written, but only recorded by Celtic Frost in 1984. So there's some hints of Celtic Frost, but Trance Death is really all about resurrecting the music of Hellhammer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look, I know the Demon Entrails retrospective is out there, but you've done, and congratulations on this, by the way. I think that's due with regards to the Danse Macabre box set, easily the best box set out there of any of the legacy or classic bands available by far. And believe me, I've got many of them. From Wasp is not too bad, but the Deicide one is terrible, to be quite frank. No liner notes, no nothing. I don't know what happened there, but I've asked Glenn about it, but another matter. Do you feel like as though it's the right time for you to do something similar, though, with Hellhammer?
Well, I think I tend to underestimate the reach of the music that I've written. So I'm the last person to go somewhere and say, yeah, we need to do this. The Danse Macabre box set that you mentioned, that was actually an idea by BMG in London, who hold the rights to my early catalog. And they came to me and said, let's do this box set. And luckily, even though they hold the rights, they asked me to be involved with it. They didn't have to do that. So maybe it's time for a Hellhammer box set. But it's unlikely that I would go and propose that is the powers that be decide, yeah, we should have a box set. I'll certainly talk about it. Yeah. I don't have the rights to that music, unfortunately. We were very young. We signed contracts that took away all our rights. So even if I was going to go and say, let's do a box set, I can't decide that on my own.
Look. Speaking of contracts and rights, do you have to continue to have much of a relationship with Noise Records these days?
Well, Noise Records have been recreated. BMG, like I said, have the rights, and they have the rights also of other early Noise Records bands. So they decided to relaunch the label, but there's really nothing in common with the old Noise other than the name and the logo. And this new Noise Records that is a subsidiary of BMG in London is actually a fantastic label. They very, very unlike the old Noise Records. They care for the artist. They talk to the artist. They have fair contracts. They let the artist decide about all the artistic aspects. It's a label as you can dream of being on, versus the old Noise Records that constantly worked against the artist.
Yeah, I know there's quite a bit of copy out there about your thoughts on what it was like working with them. They were bastards back in the day. There's no doubt about that, trying to turn you guys into a thrash band and all this stuff. And we loved you for your avant-garde and your left-of-centeredness. And that, look, there is another aspect to your career that I truly love, and it's foundational to my growth as a fan, and that's Cold Lake, okay? Look, I'm sure you're aware that there's a cohort of fans out there, people like me, that would love to see you embrace this period. So are you open to perhaps remixing that album?
I'm afraid that's impossible, because I destroyed all the materials from that recording session. I destroyed the multi-track tapes many, many, many years ago, not yesterday. We're talking about ages ago. And I destroyed the original master, which could probably get me into trouble because I didn't own it, but I still did it.
Yeah.
It's funny what 40 years can do, isn't it? When this album came out, it really ruined Celtic Frost's careers, and in my opinion, that was justified. And now, almost 40 years later, everybody comes to me and says it's not a bad album at all, and I'm like, what changed? I didn't do anything. We didn't do a PR campaign or anything like that, and now so many people like the album. I still don't like the album. And I'm trying to be, here too, I'm trying to be realistic. It's not just becoming a meme. I actually look at the music, I look at the songwriting, I look at the production, I look at the arrangements, I look at the photos, I look at the lyrics, and I cannot discover the quality that makes Celtic Frost in any of these. So this is just my judgment, looking at it realistically. Of course, I'm glad that some people like it, but I don't think it's a valid Celtic Frost album at all.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. It's when you're a fan and you don't know anything, especially here in Australia. We didn't have the context that fans in places like the US or Europe had, so we just liked the material because it was you, and didn't know that people were slagging it off. To be quite honest with you, but it's interesting too that it's actually the only time that the band's been visually documented officially. I'm talking about live Hammersmith Odeon, the only official live recording by the group. So do you maybe plan on raiding the vault for live material and releasing some other live material from the earlier period, the halcyon days, if you like?
Well, there isn't really anything. You have to remember Celtic Frost didn't have the name that it has now. We were a small underground band for most of the 1980s, and back then you didn't have digital recording, which is much cheaper than old school recording, where you had to truck a huge tape machine to the venue and so on and so on. So we didn't have the facilities, we didn't have the funds for recordings, and there's really nothing. What exists is various live recordings from the last tour of Celtic Frost, the reunion tour in 2006, 2007. We played 126 concerts all over the globe, and some of those were recorded. And we had very definite plans to release this, plus many of the unreleased demos from the Monotheist sessions. And then the band fell apart, and a few years ago, I tried to resurrect that project. But some of the former band members of Celtic Frost, especially Martin Eric Ain's brother, who inherited all of Martin Eric Ain's rights in the band, blocked that release for reasons unclear to me. Yeah. I basically finished the entire album. It was ready to be mastered. We covered everything, and unfortunately that's blocked. So I can't really answer this. It's not up to me alone. I wasn't alone.
Yeah. Look, just after Cold Lake, I thought Vanity Nemesis, looking back, was a heck of a rebound, but critics then, as I suppose they even do now, they overlook that album in favour of the seminal work. So can you tell me if those songs, very strong songs, were they written as your response to Cold Lake, or are some of those songs from even older, from before the Cold Lake album?
No, they were all written after Cold Lake. And yes, it was very clearly an attempt at the band to rediscover its true calling and its original footing. It was in Europe and North America. The album got quite favorable reviews at the time, but I think the damage at the time done by Cold Lake was too strong. It's an okay album. It's mediocre, I think. It's certainly better than Cold Lake.
Well, look, there's some remarkable material on the Nemesis of Power demo from 1993 that's available on YouTube as well. Will any of those songs, those ones that haven't been officially recorded, do you think you'll ever go back and maybe think about recording them sometime?
You should never forget these are demos, which basically means they're unfinished songs. We've tried occasionally to look at one or two of these songs and work on them, but then eventually we abandon them again. Sometimes it clicks, sometimes it just doesn't click. Sometimes you take an idea from a demo or a riff that actually feels good, and then you develop something new from that. But it's really a two-sided thing. If you work on old material like that, sometimes it also feels like it's almost like an admission of defeat. It's like, can't we come up with better material now? Do we have to go to decades old material? It's really a two-sided thing. You feel very strange about that. For example, in Triptykon, we've been going through various incarnations of a Celtic Frost demo song from the early 2000s, from the reunion period, and we've actually recorded it, and finished it, and mastered it, but it has never been released. Because on one hand we think it's a very good Celtic Frost song. On the other hand, we think, well, there's a reason why it didn't come out at the time. Yeah. We'll see. I mean, never say never. There's some demo material lying around here. There's also some rehearsal recordings that I have of Celtic Frost from the reunion period, and there's some And I'm not trying to rate myself, but there's some really fantastic riffs in there that I think, wow, that would be a waste. And I'm sure those will resurface. One or two of those will resurface on the next Triptykon album.
Well, something else too. Look, I appreciate I'm diving a bit deeper here, and I know this release wasn't supposed to be out there. Someone's leaked it, and "The Beautiful End," for example, is a song from the Prototype full demo that's on YouTube as well, and that's a fucking great song, brother. That's magnificent, but it's got an alternative vibe that I wish that you leaned into a little bit more, if I can say that. It's definitely not new metal like some of the people accuse you of leaning into, but stuff like "The Beautiful End," and I know "November" eventually became obscured as well from that demo. But will you consider writing in that vein ever again?
I think Celtic Frost and its successor Triptykon were specifically formed to accept no musical limits. I mean, if you listen to a Celtic Frost album, if you listen to Triptykon's albums, there's anything on there from jazz to electronica to classical to extreme to black metal. So I would never say never. I don't write music. I don't sit down and think I need to write a heavy metal song. I sit down and try to write a good song. I don't care what it is. Whatever inspires me at the time, whatever is inside of me. So if I happen to come up with a good riff or a good song idea that you would label alternative, yeah, of course I would do it. Why not? And as for, I know exactly what you mean with people accusing us of new metal and stuff. I always have to laugh about that. Of course, we were never new metal, and there was a lot of mediocre material during the new metal period, but there was also some good new metal bands. But the thing is, I was in a band that used industrial elements and electronic elements already in the 1980s. So
yeah,
I don't think it's far-fetched to say that Celtic Frost would have been allowed to also dabble in new metal had we chosen to do so, but we certainly didn't.
Well, they just haven't heard Apollyon Sun either, or they don't know it's out there or something if they think it's something new. Well,
that's the thing, I really wanted to try something different, something more electronic, and that's why we formed Apollyon Sun at the time. I didn't want to make a travesty out of Celtic Frost and do this with Celtic Frost. I knew exactly what Celtic Frost should sound like and what it shouldn't sound like, and that's exactly why we did Apollyon Sun.
Monotheist is the ultimate comeback album. Okay, it's real, raw, but most importantly, it's brutal. Okay. You never had a problem crafting heavy riffs. You practically, forgive me here, I know we've talked about this up top, but you practically invented this type of music. But you decided to tune it to C or B on that one there. So what was the decision making, or what was the discussion between you and Martin and the other collaborators around tuning it that low, that album?
Well, in late summer 2001, Martin and I met at the restaurant that at the time he was running in Surrey. And I had come freshly from seeing 3 concerts of the Roxy Music comeback tour all across Europe. I traveled to various locations in Europe to see Roxy Music, which was one of my main influences. I'm talking about the original Roxy Music, the experimental Roxy Music, not the 1980s charts Roxy Music, the band with Brian Eno. And when they came back, I wanted to see them really badly. And I sat there watching Roxy Music and thinking, if they can do such a phenomenal comeback and play these songs absolutely authentically here right in front of me, I think Celtic Frost can do that too. So we had a dinner, Martin and I explained to him all of this. And there have been various points before where we talked about the possible reunion. But it was just the right time, and Martin and I totally clicked about this. And the only stipulation, and this is the answer to your question, the only stipulation we made to ourselves at that evening was, let's not repeat past mistakes. Let's make an album that is really Celtic Frost. Meaning it has to be part traditional Celtic Frost, but it also has to be part experimental. And we said we're not going to put the time limit on this. It takes as long as it takes, but it has to be a good album. So we worked for 5 more than 5 years on this comeback album. We wrote 1 million songs, of which we discarded 1 million until we felt, okay, now we had an album that is worthy of the name Celtic Frost. We didn't want to repeat the Cold Lake disaster. We wanted to do really an album that we could say, yes, it is Celtic Frost, no question about it.
Ground is magnificent. Is there a special story behind that track?
Which one?
Ground?
Ground was written around the time of my divorce after 16 years of marriage to a woman I still adore. Which means the divorce was very difficult for me. I became extremely emotional when I sat in the divorce court because I didn't really want to get divorced, but some circumstances of her lifestyle made it impossible for me to continue with this marriage, even though I wanted to stay with this woman for the rest of my life. And I felt extremely desolate, devastated, desolate. And I put a lot of these feelings into the song Ground and into the song Drowned in Acid.
Yeah, they're like part 1 and 2, aren't they?
Yeah, one of them is probably more of the aggressive side, and the other one is more of the sad side, yeah.
First time I heard Ground, it just put shivers up my spine. There's only one man that could have written that song, and I'm heaping on the praise, but I just remember how I felt when I first heard it. I thought there's only one person who could have written that, and that's you. So there you go. Requiem, live at Roadburn 2019. Safa Haragi offered one of the most important and powerful performances that I've ever seen anybody do in collaboration with you, or inspiring. And I have had a conversation with her, albeit over email, about the whole thing. She gave me a lot of deep insight, but I'd love to hear your take on working with her, because I feel like she was finally someone that was your equal, someone that could actually match you, because every time I watch that video, the DVD, and you've got the vinyl there, every time I hear that, I feel like you two are tussling vocally within a huge tempest with that wonderful Metropole Orchestra around you, and of course your fantastic band at the moment. But what was it like collaborating with Safa?
It was indeed a very lucky coincidence. When we did the original recordings of these songs in the 1980s and also winter in 2005, we worked with studio musicians, including the female vocalist, people that were recommended to us by the studio owner or the producer, and we worked with them in the studio. And of course, it was absolutely professional, but you don't have a personal connection to these people because they're basically hired guns. Even if they do a fantastic job, which they did, but you're not friends with them. You hire them, you pay them for a professional job. With Safa, on the other hand, she's the wife of our drum tech, and she had also performed with Triptykon's guitar player Vicentura in his other band Dark Fortress. And I actually saw this live. I came to a concert of Dark Fortress just to see what she sounds like live. When we started rehearsing the Requiem in Zurich, her husband, our drum tech, also came and attended rehearsal. The whole thing became like a family affair, which is, of course, ideal because you start connecting not just for the few minutes of the music, but you have a much deeper connection and you start to know each other's emotions a little bit, which is, of course, ideal when the song begins to live. And we actually managed to translate that onto the stage when we performed the Requiem, which of course was a very high pressure production. Nonetheless, it was there. When I looked over at Safa when we performed, I could actually feel her, and I think it was the same for her. We looked at each other; it was just this magical connection, and I think that's what you hear. And I'm very, very glad that we preserved this in a recording.
Agreed. I'll just do a time check. Have you got another interview in a minute's time?
No.
Okay, fantastic.
In half an hour's time.
All right. So, look, I've read enough interviews with you and enough. I used to buy Guitar World and Guitar for the Practicing Musician back in the day, and you were one of the few extreme musicians who used to feature amongst their pages. I'm sure you remember, but I remember them talking about you used Ibanez Iceman guitars, okay, an Ibanez Tube Screamer, and the Boss PW1 rocker wah for solos. How important do you think that combination was for you in developing your sound?
It was crucial. I spent a good part of Hellhammer's existence searching for my sound. I was extremely inexperienced and I didn't know all the equipment that existed. And of course, you have to realize there was no internet where you could research it at the time. You only find out about equipment either if some of your friends told you about it, or if you happened to walk into a music store and you saw something cool and were able to try it, or the occasional music mag, of which there was far fewer than there's now, or used to be before the internet. So I was searching for what I had in my mind as my sound, but I had no idea to get there. And during the last 2 months of Hellhammer, we tried to expand the band into a 4-piece with a second guitar player. And that second guitar player came to the audition with Tube Screamer. And I asked him, wow, I've never seen this. Can I try it? And I tried it with my setup. And when I plugged in this Tube Screamer, my setup out of the blue became a wall of sound, exactly what I had always been looking for. And I knew, okay, now I need to get myself a Tube Screamer or 2 or 3 or 5. And that's what happened. And so this it's a Hellhammer legacy that I still am playing exactly the same setup. Right now, next to me is a Marshall at my home with the same setup that I had in Hellhammer. It's extremely crucial setup. Having said that, I noticed that from people who talk to me or people come to our rehearsal room and they want to play through my rig, people tend to massively underestimate what the person who's playing the instrument, what influence they have on the sound. I have people come to our rehearsals all the time and say, can I try your guitar? And they play it through my setup exactly one to one the same thing. And it doesn't sound like me. So I tend to think it's 50-50. 50% is the equipment that you use and 50% is the approach that you have. I play my guitar very wildly. I'm the old school guitar player. I grew up during the 1970s when bands were smashing the guitars on stage, and this is what shaped me. I know nowadays people play very expensive instruments and they caress them very carefully, which is of course also legitimate, but it's not the way I play. And my very forceful approach is a huge part of why my sound is my sound.
Have you still got the JCM 800s, you know, the 100-watt heads of your amps?
Absolutely.
Have you still got them? Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's probably my 10th JCM 800 next to me. Absolutely.
Amazing. Yeah. I think just about all extreme metal owes you a debt with that one there, because you showed us musicians, because I'm also a musician, that to your point, yeah, it is about throwing it off your rack, but you've got to have the right chain. You've got to have the right gear almost already there. It's a bit like having the right Formula One car. You've got to make the right driver with the right Formula One car, and magical things happened. Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, here's the thing. I don't want to sound like a dinosaur. When I go to the studio with Triptykon, we're using the latest computer equipment to record. We are very happy about the technological revolution that happened in the last few years. We use all that stuff. On the other hand, nearly every single time that I'm playing live, people come up to me afterwards and say, how do you get that sound? And all I can tell them, like a dinosaur, is, well, I don't simulate my guitar. I don't have an amp simulator. I don't have a camper. I have the actual very heavyweight, cumbersome Marshalls. That's why it sounds the way it does. And of course, I know how good amp simulation is by now, and I'm sure one day it will reach the Marshall. But my experience as a lifelong Marshall player and as somebody who is frequently exposed to the most modern technology, because our guitar player has his own studio, I think the Marshall still cannot be top with computers at this point, at least. And this is when people constantly ask me, how do you arrive at your sound? And I'm like, well, because I stick to the same shit that people had in the early 70s.
Yeah. Right there. Yeah, well, you're one of the originals, and that shows. Yeah. So, but the other thing that I really liked about you too, and this is really important for me as a bass player, was that you mentioned years ago that, and I'll quote you. I like to write on the bass, and I recently have written, and recently I've written more on the bass than on the guitar. I don't know what era that was from, but you were certainly talking about the bass there. So, is that still true?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I'm actually a frustrated bassist. I wanted to be a bassist, but we couldn't find a guitar player, and then we couldn't find a singer. So here I am. But I actually wanted to be a bassist in Hellhammer. But
I
life
can
has
hear
other
that.
plans.
You know why
Yeah,
I can hear that? Because you write riffs in the way that a bass player would, because they're on point, they're bang on point, but you're slightly behind the beat at times where it's necessary.
That's an extremely correct analysis. I think the rhythm with which I write is different than a typical guitar player. I totally agree with that. I think you can hear that I learned string instruments on a Rickenbacker bass rather than a guitar.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. When you were before you were starting out, I'm talking because you mentioned the 70s there. Who were the musicians that really inspired you? I'm not so much to get into metal and into music, but to play music.
Well, of course, it's a complete cliche. Black Sabbath is probably ranks at the very top. And of course, nowadays that's a given, and it's a boring answer. But if you look at it with the eyes of a young teenager of the first half of the 70s, my first Black Sabbath album was Volume 4, and I mean that was to discover this album and never have heard this music before. Unlike today, when you listen to Black Sabbath, there's a million bands in context. But listening to Volume 4 without any of that context, it was like a concrete hammer of extraordinary proportions. It's impossible to describe the effect that had on me. And I was like, what, this music represents my feelings. I had never, welcome to Chris with my cat.
Oh, good.
I had never heard anything like this. And it connected to me so strongly. I didn't know why it connected to me so much, but it was the music that I felt I was born to listen to. And around the same time, I was the lone Blue Oyster Cult On Your Feet and On Your Knees live album, which is not quite as heavy as Black Sabbath, but it has a number of similar dark riffs on it. And that too, I was like, wow, these riffs. And I wanted to be like that. Back then, we were talking years from me becoming a musician. I was like, I want to be part of this world, no matter how. If I'm a roadie, whatever, I need to be part of it. This is me. And I saw the Who in concert at the time, and Pete Townsend, in the middle of a song, took off his guitar and smashed it into the amps. And the music was so heavy, the way he played with his bit milling and stuff. These bands, now they're dinosaurs themselves, and they're no longer relevant in a way. The Who have become housewife music, but at the time they were at the peak of their powers. And like I said, if you hadn't heard anything like this, it was like an electric shock that you would never forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of how I feel about you, actually, about your music. It's interesting. But look, growing up adjacent to the post-war era in a Europe that was, we all know Europe was smashed apart by World War II, and you're growing up there in Switzerland in the village. How challenging was it, or was it challenging for you to start a heavy metal band?
It was extremely challenging. Switzerland is a little island in the middle of Europe that has no natural resources. The resources that Switzerland built for itself is like financial services and insurance and stuff like that. And the country is shaped very much according to it. And since our little village was relatively close to Zurich, which is the financial capital of Switzerland, everybody who was in school with me wanted to have a financial career and become rich. Nobody wanted to become a musician. So when I started putting together a metal band, it was extremely difficult for me to find people who are willing to go that path with me. Nobody was interested in dressing in leather and spending their time in a wet rehearsal room stinking from mildew. Everybody wanted to go work for a bank, have a career. And then we became more extreme after discovering the new wave British heavy metal, after discovering Venom, Motorhead, Discharge, which made the pool of possible musicians even smaller, because the ones who wanted to play metal, they wanted to sound like the Swiss Bank Crocus and not like Discharge. So it was extremely difficult. And as I described in my second book, at times it literally threatened the existence of the band, because we couldn't find musicians for months sometimes, and the band just lingered. It was very, very difficult. And actually, it still is to find an unusual musician in Switzerland is still very difficult for pretty much the same reason.
Yeah. Well, you had to go abroad to find Reed, didn't you? Was that because you couldn't find someone in Switzerland, or did you just feel like going international at that point?
Well, of course, the American metal wave at the time had taken over. And by the time Reed joined us, America was where it was happening. But that wasn't really the reason. It was really, like you said, we really couldn't find a drummer in Switzerland to match what we intended to play. A drummer who was up there with the likes of Exodus and so on. I mean, we were at that stage. We wanted to play that kind of music. We had already recorded such music, and we needed a drummer to be able to play this. And no, we couldn't find anybody in Switzerland, unfortunately.
When you saw those enormous sticks Reed was using, did you try to talk him out of it to get him to use regular size sticks?
No, we actually talked him into even bigger sticks. No, you have to understand, Celtic Frost knew no limits. Of course, some of it is very silly because we were very young and we didn't realize. Some of it is very cold. But whatever happened in Celtic Frost, we always said more of it. For better or for worse. And Reed came one day with promotional sticks that he had seen at the drum store. They had them in the window. They were basically for promotion. They were much larger. And he said, I'm going to buy these. I'm going to play on these with these. And the owner of the store was like, you can't. And Reed did. And then he discovered even bigger promotional sticks somewhere else and told us about it. And we said, look, go buy them. We need to have those on stage. So no, we encouraged all of this.
I don't need to tell you how much the fans would appreciate a reunion between you and Reed, but I know you've tried as well, by the way, but is that likely to happen any time again in the future?
You know what? It's something I think about every single day. Reed is still one of my closest friends, and we are still in contact, and we have talked about it. And Reed would have been part of the Celtic Frost Union in the 2000s, but Martin didn't like the idea for some reason. I never really found out why Martin didn't want Reed to be part of it, because I actually flew to New York to ask Reed to be part of it, and Reed said he would be. But Martin opposed it and brought in his own friend, Frank Ocesa, which of course eventually wrote the band.
Yeah.
I respect Martin's choices, which is why it happened. Celtic Frost wasn't a dictatorship. But now in hindsight, maybe we should have done it with Reed. And I frequently talk with Reed about him flying to Zurich. He still lives in North America. I talked to him about flying to Zurich and us doing a session to see where we stand musically with our capabilities and see if it's possible to do maybe a Martin Ain tribute show or two somewhere. Not to reform Celtic Frost, of course, which is impossible, but to ask other ex-Celtic Frost members to come and put together a lineup of people who all were in Celtic Frost, play Celtic Frost songs in honor of Martin, maybe for 2 shows or something like that. We have talked about this, and I'm sure we're going to try to do it. I don't know. I can't really comment on Reed's playing proficiency because I'm constantly on stage and he isn't, so I don't know, and it remains to be seen. He says he can do it, so let's see. If he can do it, I'm sure it's going to happen.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed on that one as well. I hope I'm not overstepping the mark by asking this question here, but do you think that you and Martin would have been mates if you didn't have the musical connection you had? In other words, do you think you would have been friends anyway?
No, because the music was the core of our friendship. We were quite different people, which was, of course, good for Celtic Frost. What united us always was the love for music and also the openness to listen to, not just to heavy metal, but to new wave and all kinds of things. We bonded over bands like Bauhaus and Susie and the Banshees and Sister Mercy at the time. Just at the same intensity as we bonded over bands like Witchfind and Tigers of Panther. And we remained friends until Martin's death. But the leading thing through this friendship for all these years was the music. I think privately we were probably too different to if there hadn't been any music, I don't think we would have had a common bond. It was really the music that joined us. But it was a lasting bond. I'm very happy about it.
A very fruitful bond, yeah. It's one that'll transcend history. I can tell you that as a fan, no doubt. What about what aspect? Well, what's been the greatest challenge you've had to overcome, you think, when you look back?
Jesus, there were so many. There were many significant challenges. I think the biggest challenge in every band's life, and certainly in our pop, was people not believing in us. People not believing that this was going to lead to anywhere, that it was valid. Starting with Swiss musicians who didn't want to join because they thought it was just noise. Then going to record companies to whom we sent our demos, and they thought it wouldn't sell anything. Then finally signing a deal, and the label, even though they signed us, not believing in us, and so on. It is this having to prove constantly that your music is valid and that it can go somewhere. That was the biggest challenge. And of course, a lot of people dropped out. A lot of people didn't have the stamina that Martin and I had. I was always confronted with musicians that had a really big mouth and said, "Yeah, I want that too, and I'm prepared to go the mile," and they did. And Martin and I were really the only ones who were prepared to do it, in spite of all the adversity.
Are you satisfied with Monotheist as the final word in yours and Martin's partnership?
As a record, I'm absolutely satisfied with it, yes. I'm dissatisfied with the fact that it's the last Celtic Frost album. I wanted to make many more with Martin. And initially, so did Martin, but towards the end of the Monotheist tour, he said he's had enough. That his life in Zurich as the manager of various clubs and restaurants and bars was much easier. He literally told me, I have to appear at one meeting per week and the money flows into my account. That was his words. And I understood that, of course. And of course, it's a comfortable life. And he wasn't in an equal shape that I was physically. I understood all of that. And of course, it was his choice. But it really disappointed me because we had opened a whole new Pandora's box as far as his songwriting was concerned. He had finally gained the confidence to write full songs by the time we did Monotheist. And I really wanted to exploit that. But it wasn't to be, and it led to the end of the band. Unfortunately, we remained friends. And Martin often said we will write music together again after I left Celtic Frost, but of course it never happened because what would we do outside of Celtic Frost? So I'm very sad that it's the last Celtic Frost album, and that I have to do the next few Celtic Frost albums with a different name. But I'm very, very proud of Monotheist. It's exactly the album we wanted to make. And as an album, yes, I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it, yeah.
Look, in a career that has the types of highs and the sort of critical acclaim that really, frankly, nobody else has got, only you've got them, what gives you the greatest source of feeling of accomplishment when you look back over it all?
That's very, very modest. Because it's simply that I'm granted to be a musician. It was such a dream of mine. I told you just a tiny little bit before what happened to me when I listened to Black Sabbath for the first time, or The Who. And that wish inside of me eventually, that grew so strong that I said, I want to try to be a musician. It became so strong, but it was so unrealistic in the Switzerland of the time. there was outside of Crook, because there was no other band that had made it as musicians out of Switzerland. So it wasn't really a realistic dream. And yet the audience gave me this. The audience gave me this immeasurable gift. And here I am at 61, still being a musician. So the biggest gratitude I feel is towards the audience for making this possible for me. I feel so indebted to them. I don't even know where to start with that. If you knew how much this wish was burning inside of me as a teenager, and I was against all odds, I was granted this wish by people listening to our music. I owe them everything.
Well, we owe you a lot, I've got to say. As fans, it's, as I said up top, the companionship your music has offered us, and I've used your music for everything from getting to sleep to going to doing rowing and to even swimming. Could you get swimming headphones these days? When I swim, I listen to Celtic Frost. So it doesn't seem to be any application your music doesn't seem to suit itself to. But I digress. So look. If you look back over the whole thing, I mean, this is a hypothetical, of course it is. But if you were given a chance to change anything, would you?
Yeah. Yeah, I would change a few things. Yes, of course. Hindsight is one hell of a thing, isn't it? And also maturity. I'm no longer the 20-year-old Tom without any experience and also without any personal maturity. And I'm sure Martin would tell you the exact same thing. Yeah, there are a couple of things that I would change. I certainly went to Cold Lake. I'm sorry about that.
Worries.
I'm also sure that both Martin and I, given the chance, will probably handle certain situations differently between us. We were hotheads at the time, and we were extremely determined, both of us. And we both stepped on each other's toes, sometimes in a massive way, in our eagerness at the time. It was also the eagerness that powered Celtic Frost, so it's not easily dismissed. But I think a couple of instances could have taken a little more maturity on both sides, and I'm sure Martin would totally agree with this. So maybe these things I would change.
I'll make this my final question for you then. So after a career that you've had, it's not about achieving things in the future. I think it's more of a question of what do you hope the future holds?
That's a very difficult question. Looking at the earth, and I think I'm a quite informed person. Ever since I was a child, I was fascinated by history and politics and so on and so on. And I'm also a very open person. I really want information, and I want to build my own opinion about it. But I want facts. I don't want conspiracies and so on. I thrive on facts. And looking at the world the way it is right now, I find it very difficult to muster any hope. I tend to see a human race that hasn't learned much in 15,000 years of what they call becoming civilized. I don't see much civilization in it. We're still killing each other over ludicrous ideas. We still haven't found unity, even though there's more of us than ever before on this planet. We still destroy this very planet that we live on. We still obliterate all the other living beings on this planet that have been here far longer than we have. Which makes me think we haven't learned a thing, even though we call us the peak of the pyramid. I wish I could give you a better answer, but hope, I don't see much of it at this moment. I wish I did.
Yeah. Do you believe in God or a God?
No. No, I was really into fairy tales until I was maybe 8. But I'm 61 now.
I'm hearing you. Yeah. Well, Tom, it's a milestone for me personally. Just thank you again for doing what you've done. I've said this a lot to people like in your position, but I say it to you personally from me. You know, it's your music has just been a companion in some pretty dark moments for me as well. When I was a young fella, I went through a boarding school and, you know, was institutionalized effectively, and then I came out. And yours was a companion through some moments where I was trying to make sense of the world. It was really a soundtrack of me emerging into the person that I am now. And I'm as I say, I know you hear this from lots of people when meet and greets and during interviews and stuff. But just to have this opportunity with you to share that with you is really important to me personally. So thank you very much for that.
Well, I have to thank you, and not to jump to quick conclusions, but I think given the circumstances of my own youth, I actually might understand what you just said. And I think my music comes from the same place that you're perceiving it or perceived it when you were young in your situation. And maybe that's why I connected.
I reckon so.
Yeah, I've heard similar things before, but you know, it never becomes normal. Like I said before, I was granted something very, very big, and I never ever take it for granted. And I never become complacent about it.
Well, long may you stick around and create glorious, almighty, riff-driven music. It's fantastic to listen to after all of these years. It's, you know, I'll keep on listening, and I just look forward to all the mini releases, and I'll certainly be there at the back room in Brisbane to watch your stellar performance of so many Hellhammer classics.
Well, absolutely. Well, hopefully we'll have a chat when you're there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd love to catch up. So that'd be wonderful. And just thanks so much again for this opportunity. Much appreciated.
Well, I'm as grateful for this interview. Thank you very, very much.
Well, there you have it. A chat with the great one, Tom G. Warrior, Celtic Frost, Hellhammer, and Triptykon. Can't wait for those shows. Check gig guides, but I'll make it easier. And I've put the dates and links to tickets in the episode description. Be there if you're an Aussie and you're into extreme metal. There's none better than Tom G. Warrior. All right, if you enjoyed that chat, go across to scarsandguitars.com and you'll find many more that await members of Testament, Death, Megadeth, Morbid Angel, Obituary. I could go on. You get the drift. I think at this point, this show is... It's no boast to say that I have more interviews out there than almost anybody. There's almost 1,000 at this point, and many of them are with members of prominent bands and bands that have made an impact on the underground. So if you love your extreme metal interviews, I'm pretty much your one-stop shop. I'm trying to get through all of the legends, as many as I possibly can. Okay, so there's a heap more to go, no doubt. King Diamond comes to mind straight away. Alex Webster from Cannibal Corpse. I'm sure that will happen at some point, but I've just got to think about all the people that I've already had a conversation with. Eric Rutan, for example, the great Eric Rutan from Morbid Angel and recently Cannibal Corpse does the show introduction. So as I say, if you love your conversations, your interviews, I make the point of saying conversation because I try not to conduct interviews. They're a two-way. They're a safe space for any topic to come up, from social and current affairs to politics to, of course, music. It's all on the table. All right, that's it from me. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I'm the host of the show, Scars and Guitars. Until the next one, it's a goodbye for now.